You are listening to an Afraid of the Dark narration. We hope you enjoy. The legend of Andy began on the very day I encountered his overpowering odor. It was as if an invisible wall of stench enveloped him. No one knew the source of his terrible smell, and the theories that circulated through the schoolyard were as wild as they were imaginative. As days turned into weeks, Andy became an outcast, isolated from the rest of us. The kids would scramble to find seats anywhere but next to him, and teachers, although they tried to hide it, couldn't help but keep their distance too. It was then that I noticed a shadowy figure, a specter, lurking near him. This figure didn't belong to our world. It was drawn to Andy's smell. The more it lingered, the more distressed Andy became. It was as though the very essence of his being was under siege. On the morning bus, we arrived at Andy's place. Some kids had already started commenting on the untidiness of his yard, but I just figured his mom didn't have many housing options. Andy's mom waved him off to school, just like she did every day. When Andy finally boarded the bus, I noticed an unusual and distinct smell. I couldn't quite identify it, but it was unmistakable, reminiscent of something my parents had discovered in the basement one scorching summer, a pungent stale mold. The other kids were now making derogatory and sarcastic comments about his odor. "Did you sleep in something foul? Don't you know what a bath is? Hasn't your mom taught you to use deodorant?" But the last comment got me. "That kid smells like something died." It wasn't an over-exaggeration. He did smell foul. It could literally only be described as a smell you get if you killed an animal and left it out in the hot sun for days and weeks. Many students at our school faced difficult circumstances, but Andy's appearance was particularly disheartening. It was evident his mom was struggling to afford to buy him new clothes that fit properly. The t-shirt he wore was dirty and had holes. As he approached my seat, I could see that maybe he'd been crying. I felt sorry for him. This kid was going to be in for a real rough time if someone didn't try and help him. I wasn't gonna be unkind like them. I'm the type to give the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't easy being around that smell, though. I literally had to hold my breath when he was near me. Not wanting to be part of the persecution gang at the back of the bus, I smiled at him and offered him the seat next to me and said, "Welcome aboard. You can call me Zack." The next day I smelt the pungent odor again, and my mouth started to taste rancid and dry. Andy's mom usually waved to him from the window as he boarded the bus, but today was different. She stood outside the front door, waving him off, and something about her demeanor struck me as odd. Her face had a dark mark on one side, like a bruise. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened. Andy climbed onto the bus and settled into the seat next to me. That's when I noticed it. The smell that had been bothering me for a while was even worse today. It was as if something was seriously wrong. I couldn't just sit there and ignore it any longer. I leaned in closer to Andy, trying to keep my voice low so the other kids wouldn't hear. "Hey, Andy, are you okay?" Concern filling my voice. I didn't want to pry, but I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Andy hesitated for a moment, his eyes avoiding mine. Finally, he mumbled, "Yeah, I'm fine, Zack." But I could tell he wasn't fine. His words were unconvincing, and that bruise on his mom's face had me worried. I knew I had to do something. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a bundle of clothes. They were too small for me, but I thought maybe Andy could use them. I offered them to him, hoping it might help in some way, and perhaps even stop the horrid recurring odor. "Here, Andy, I thought you might be able to use these," I said quietly. My heart raced as I handed him the clothes, hoping he would open up or at least accept the gesture as a sign of friendship. Andy looked at the clothes and then back at me, his eyes welling up with emotion. He nodded and managed a small, grateful smile. It wasn't a solution to whatever was going on, but it was a start. I hoped that by extending this small act of kindness, I could help Andy, and maybe, just maybe, things would get better for him. The following day, Andy donned the clothes I had gifted him. They fit him remarkably well. I observed a newfound sense of contentment in him, despite the lingering odor that clung to him, despite the fresh clothes. That is, until a girl decided to be unkind. "Haven't you taken a bath yet?" she taunted. "Hey, Zack, why don't you let him use your bath too?" chimed in another kid, which only served to fuel Andy's anger. It was at this moment that I witnessed it once more. The spectral presence, drawn to Andy's scent and steadily growing in size. Its skeletal hand ominously hovered above Andy's head, as if poised to pluck him straight out of the bus. A shiver ran down my spine. The other kids continued their mockery, and Andy, seemingly embarrassed that his new clothes couldn't conceal the scent, hastily grabbed his backpack, fled the bus, and sought refuge in his own home. I didn't catch sight of Andy throughout the remainder of the school week. However, I overheard a conversation between two teachers who were discussing Andy. They had reached out to Child Protective Services some time ago, and the agency was now involved. As a child myself, there wasn't much I could do to help, but I understood that despite CPS sometimes having a negative image, their purpose was to assist. If Andy's mother was struggling, it was the right step to take. After all, she couldn't possibly want her child to endure that persistent odor. Another week passed without any sign of Andy, and my stomach churned with worry. I hoped he hadn't been transferred to another school. When Monday came around, the school bus halted in front of Andy's house, and it was evident that something was seriously amiss. This time, when he boarded the bus, he wore an expression of anger and hostility, casting a piercing glare in my direction, as though I had wronged him gravely. His mother stood outside, her demeanor markedly different from before. There were no waves of greeting this time. Instead, she stood there, seemingly glaring at me, and I couldn't help but notice the scratches on her. Did Andy harm her because he was reluctant to return to school? Perhaps his anger stemmed from the CPS involvement. It was possible that they had visited and found nothing alarming, which explained why he was still here. It felt like something had transpired within that house, something far from positive. One gloomy afternoon, I approached Andy, who was sitting alone under a tree. The stench was almost unbearable, but my determination to uncover the truth pushed me forward. I asked him about the specter, and fear flickered in his eyes. "You can see it too?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I was determined to uncover the truth behind why Andy's persistent odor hadn't gone away. My mom had already heard about the situation and cautioned me to stay away, but I wasn't about to heed her advice. I needed answers. So I arranged to visit Andy's house after school. As we disembarked from the bus, I trailed behind him, eventually arriving at his front door. The door swung open to reveal Andy's mom, who seemed displeased by my presence. The mess that extended from the yard into the living room was hard to miss. It made me wonder if it was common for Andy's mom not to clean up after themselves. I thought that they likely didn't receive many visitors, which might explain their indifference to the mess. Andy's mom hesitated momentarily, then glanced at Andy as if seeking his approval. Andy nodded, and he proceeded to lead me inside. The odor grew even more pungent in that room. I could have sworn I witnessed the eerie specter devouring a lifeless cat in a distant corner, with feces scattered across the floor. Andy guided me toward a staircase leading to the basement. "What's down there, Andy?" I whispered cautiously. "My room," he replied softly, giving my hand a gentle tug as if encouraging me to join him. "You're my special friend, Zack." The basement exuded a dampness that had allowed mold to flourish on its walls. It was dimly lit, but within the shadows, my eyes fell upon two men shackled to the wall. One had a gruesomely torn throat, while the other, with his abdomen brutally torn open, appeared to be a recent victim, his blood dripping onto the chilly concrete floor. I couldn't ignore the badge on the second man's shirt, which bore the letters CPS and his name. My mind raced with disbelief. "Andy," I stammered, struggling to comprehend. "Did you—" Andy gestured toward the first man. "That was my dad, Zack. He was a narcissist," he explained, then pointed towards the lurking specter. "That's my real dad. He lurks in the shadows and tells me who to eliminate." To my utter horror, Andy began to consume the mangled organs hanging from the CPS worker, his teeth gnashing away. It became abundantly clear that this wasn't a child before me. It was a malevolent creature, accompanied by a sinister presence. In sheer terror, I darted past his mother, who stood silently, observing her son's grisly actions, and fled from that horrifying house. My recollection after that was hazy, but I recall vomiting a few blocks away. I took a few deep breaths, attempting to steady myself. It was then that I realized I had inadvertently left my backpack inside Andy's house, and had taken his instead. A repugnant odor emanated from it, and when I unzipped it, I was met with the sight of a rotting, lifeless heart, nestled inside as if it were a piece of lunch meat. I retched and pushed it away. Somehow, Andy had followed me from his house a few blocks away. He gestured for his backpack, and with great reluctance, I handed it to him. He smiled and walked away. Sometime after the events, I had heard that Andy was taking counseling sessions, though it hadn't helped him much as the counselor must have witnessed something horrific, because he was now very ill mentally and was unable to work. These days, Andy doesn't smell so bad, and he sits next to me on the bus. I'm too scared not to be his friend. I've advised the other kids to do the same. If you like the content on our channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can be notified when we upload more stories like this one.